Hello class, this is Building Construction for the Fire Service, Chapter 7, Wood Frame Construction. This chapter provides an overview of wood construction. It identifies type of wood frame structures as well as other wood building materials and explains related fire protection concerns for each component. The objectives we're going to cover in this chapter are: we will understand and correctly use the terminology associated with wood construction, identify and describe 6 types of wood frame structures classified as Type 5 construction. We will also identify and describe the specific fire protection differences between balloon frame and platform frame construction, and describe the construction of platform frame building. Finally, we will understand how a truss is constructed and how it performs from a fire protection perspective, and explain the difference between fire stopping and draft stopping. And then also we will describe the behavior of engineered and manufactured wood products under fire attack, as well as describe the different types of sheathing, siding, and roofing materials. Most fires are fought on, in, or under wood. Wood is combustible, of course. Wood construction creates a combustible void, and wood can have a very rapid flame spread. Now let's talk about some building terms. Local in origin, that's usually wood frame houses, and wood frame houses are a building with a skeleton of beams and columns, and the woods are just curtain walls or non-load bearing. Wall bearing means it's a structure where the entire structural load is carried on the walls. A wood walled building means that a wall bearing building that carries the load of the structure and contents. An example of that would be like for a log cabin, for instance. Let's talk about some terminology. This is wood frame terminology, and the first is a chamfer, and that is to cut off the corners of timber to retard ignition. End match lumber is with tongues and grooves at the end. Engineered wood typically refers to laminated timbers for wood modified from its natural state. In other words, like wood that's been bent into a curve, for instance. Glued or laminated timbers are planks glued together to form a solid timber. Heavy timber is lumber that is 8 inches or more in its smallest dimension. Joists are floor beams. Legacy construction is the use of solid wood members as opposed to lightweight wood trusses and wooden joists or wooden eye joists. Some more terminology. Lumber is wood that has been sawed and planed. Matched lumber is tongue and groove under lumber, and it's usually lengthwise, like you would find in an older wood floor where it's tongued and grooved. Oriental strand board, or OSB, is made of layers of strands of wood cut from logs with a fairly constant width to length ratio. Plywood is layers of wood veneer laid in different directions, glued together under pressure. Rough lumber is lumber that is left as sawn on all 4 sides. Splines are wooden strips that are fit into grooves into 2 adjacent planks to make a tight floor. Studs are columns in frame buildings. Wood is the hard fibrous material forming the major parts of trees, of course, and wood lathe is the narrow, rough strips of wood nailed to studs. An example of that is what you see here in this picture. That's wood lathe construction. And the white stuff you see coming through is what's called French plaster, and that's on the other side. And what you're seeing is wood lathe construction with the plaster where it's oozed through the planks that are nailed to the studs. This is very common in houses from pre-World War II and a few right after World War II, but there are an awful lot of houses that were built during that age and before. Uses of wood buildings. There are a lot of them, and many of them are structural, and they carry the building loads. Non-bearing wood, which is wood lathe for carrying plaster, or wood wainscoting, like the picture you saw in the previous slide, and they're used for roofing and also interior trim. Let's talk about types of wood frame buildings. We have log cabin, post and frame, balloon frame, which is sometimes called Eastern framing, platform frame, which is sometimes called Western framing, plank and beam, and truss frame. Let's talk about log cabins first. These are constructed of entire tree trunks as opposed to boards sawn from trees. Many older buildings, even multi-story buildings, are concealed log cabins. Many carry unexpectedly heavy loads, and they are coming back into fashion, and interior surfaces of log cabins might be boards or plywood, although sometimes they're left unfinished. Now let's talk about post and frame. This has an identifiable frame or skeleton of timber fitted together, and there's mortise and tenon, socket and tongue construction, and they're fitted together to transfer loads. And then let's talk about trunnels. This is a New England term for a tree nail. Post and frame buildings are framed buildings, and the walls are not structural or load-bearing. It's deceptive imitation of post and frame. And then you've got balloon frame houses that are a deceptive kind of imitation post and frame. And these were built with the exterior finish to resemble post and frame construction. They're also called English Tudor style homes. Other types of construction are decorated to resemble post and frame style. Now you have to bear in mind, in the western United States here where we're studying, we really don't see this kind of construction, but back east there is a tremendous amount of this kind of construction. So bear in mind, if you move back east, you're likely to encounter this. Now let's talk about balloon frame. The background of this is its walls of ordinary studs nailed together, an almost universal construction method for multi-story wooden buildings until the middle of the 20th century. The fire danger is that the fire can spread through all interconnected spaces from cellar to attic and across the ceiling. Interconnected voids can be considered to be one big balloon. Installing fire stopping in an old building is very costly, so most houses don't have it. Unfortunately, balloon frame is coming back into style, so this is something you definitely need to be aware of also. Let's talk about fires in balloon frame buildings. Fire found in the walls can quickly cross the building through joist channels. Use of plumbing torch to brass a copper tube or thaw out a pipe can often be a culprit. The basement is usually the worst place for a fire to start. Firefighters need to anticipate the spread. Extension sector is an officer whose function is to observe the building on all sides, watching for signs of fire spread. Vermiculite is a sand-like material that acts as a fire stop that has been added to some buildings that are balloon frame construction. This is an example of fires in a balloon frame building. It's an illustration how a rundown, overcrowded, old Victorian balloon frame style house, and they will literally go up like a box of matches. Let's talk about platform frame. This is defined where the first floor is built as a platform. The subflooring is laid on the joists, and the frame for the first floor walls is erected on the first floor. There's no continuity from top to bottom. In a platform frame house, there are inherent barriers to limit the spread of fire through the walls. An open stairwell is the quickest way for smoke and heat to rise to the top of the home. Soffits are false spaces above built-in cabinets that provide a connection, generally without a fire stop, between walls and joist spaces. A kitchen fire can easily spread through soffits. This is an illustration of a platform frame house. So you can see how the frame construction is right on that base floor, and then everything is added above it. Now let's talk about construction of a platform frame building. It consists of rough carpentry that includes all of the wood framing members and sheathing of a building. A sill is found on the platform of the frame of a wood structure. Subflooring is laid on top of the joists, and it serves as the base for the unfinished floor. Bridging or cross bracing helps share the loading placed on the floor. The header or bond course is the bricks laid so that the end is visible. A trimmer is a piece of lumber that supports a header and can be found in floor openings such as stairwells, and they run perpendicular to floor joists. Continuing with platform frame building, the bottom plate is laid on the subfloor where the vertical studs are installed. Top plate is the top horizontal member of a wood frame wall that supports the ceiling joist. Rafters are wood members used to support the roof sheeting and loads. Ridge boards are placed on the ridge of the roof onto which the upper ends of the rafters are fastened. Hip is the rafter at the angle where two sloping roofs or sides of a roof meet. The valley is the lower slope formed by the connection of two inclined planes of a roof. Stringers are a component of a set of stairs used to support risers and treads. Now let's discuss plank and beam construction. This is used in modern construction. It's built with heavier beams that are spaced much farther apart than the traditional 16 inches. They consist of thick, finished tongue and groove planks that are used for flooring, and this helps reduce the volume of concealed space in which fire can burn, shielded from hose streams. The interior finishes often have high flame spread and smoke developing characteristics. In many cases, rooms are all one large open area. Like the great room and kitchen and dining room, there are no separate walls for them. They're just one large area. Continuing with plank and beam, fire in high open spaces can spread rapidly and develop into a huge volume. Intermediate structures should be sprinklered or of non-combustible construction. Unfortunately, they all aren't built that way. This is an example of a plank and beam building, and you can see how once it's finished, there's a huge amount of open space in this type of architecture. And a fire's just gonna take all the oxygen and go for it. It's really gonna do a lot of damage very quickly. Now let's talk about lightweight trusses and other wooden members in construction. Lightweight trusses and other wooden members means that knowledge has developed gradually in the fire service. It contributes to lighter weight structures, allows off-site prefabrication, and satisfies many building requirements. They are lighter in weight than solid construction. They provide long, clear spans and can be delivered prefabricated. With lightweight wood trusses, they've been in general use since the 1960s and are joined together with steel gusset plates called gang nails. Finger joints are interlocking wood pieces glued together to create a longer piece of dimensional lumber. And this is used when you can't find, like, if you need a 30-inch beam, for example, to make a truss, or a 30-inch piece of lumber and it's not available, then you'll see this type of construction to create a longer piece of dimensional lumber when you can't find a single piece. The dangers of wood truss floors. These are a hazard to firefighters. They have a high surface to mass ratio, and heating of the gusset plate will decompose tensioned wood fibers holding the teeth. There are no outward indication of truss building presence and may be disclosed by smoke or fire pushing through the wall of the floor line. Some more dangers of lightweight wood trusses. You can see here in the picture where they're placing one into place. They're equally hazardous as wood truss floors. They're lacking a single ridge pole to help support a firefighting roof ladder. Exposed roofs can fall over in a windstorm. Ventilation must be done with an aerial device, and you can expect a roof collapse during a fire, a roof made of this type of construction. Now let's talk about the truss void. This is found within a truss roof system, and this void space is between the top floor of the ceiling and the roof. It represents a large area in which explosive carbon monoxide can accumulate. Voids are interconnected horizontally and vertically. The National Fire Protection Association NFPA Fire Protection Handbook provides information on carbon monoxide. A rule of thumb: any exposure in which the product of concentration in parts per million times duration in minutes equals 33,000 means that it's likely to be dangerous. The flammability range of carbon monoxide is from 12.5 all the way up to 74%. It's a pretty high concentration. Catastrophe potential. You have the possibility of lateral expansion because trusses support the balcony that is the only exit for occupants and the only access point for the fire department. Fire stopping is penetrated by lighting circuits. Stairway exits can be involved in fire and collapse before occupants have escaped, and exit facilities should be totally separated from the truss void itself. Unfortunately, contractors don't always build them this way. Now let's talk about automatic sprinklers and truss voids. NFPA 13R is the standard for the installation of sprinkler systems in low-rise residential occupancies. It's intended to prevent flameovers and save lives. Partial systems that should not be expected to provide the fire suppression or control that a full sprinkler system would have provided. So some houses only have partial sprinkler systems. Fires in relatively new 13R protected condo and older 13R sprinkler dwellings have those types of limited systems. Now let's talk about lightweight wooden I-beams. This is a wooden beam. It's inefficient in terms of weight and cost. It's a sawn beam replaced by wooden I-beams. A steel I-beam can be used, and steel is extruded through a die. The top flange and bottom flange are wide to cope with compressive and tensile loads. Then you have sawed wooden beams, and these can be thought of as containing an I-beam with a surplus wood along the sides. Firefighters stand and operate on the surplus wood on a burning structure. Gradual sagging is a warning of impending collapse. With wooden I-beams, they consist of a solid or laminated 2x4 for the top and bottom chords, the OSB web of plywood between the chords, and then there's also a web of the I-beam, which is often penetrated by utilities and is an early failure in fires. Wooden I-joists can be considered the most dangerous of all structural members to firefighters today. Now let's talk about the truss frame. The roof and floor trusses and studs are tied into a unitized frame. The small dimension lumber will burn faster than larger solid lumber, and unsupported spans in truss structures are subject to total collapse. The loss of a stud due to a fire could precipitate the collapse of the integral roof or floor truss. Truss frame structures are plain structural components. Design assumes that every truss member will remain in its designed position under load, which without fire, it certainly does. But with fire, all bets are off. Let's talk about fire stopping and draft stopping. Some problems. Fire spreads through hidden voids, and there are no tested standards for wood fire stopping or draft stopping. The difference between fire stopping and draft stopping means that both limit the spread of fire. Fire stops typically limit vertical movement, and draft stops limit horizontal movement. Continuing with types of fire stopping, inherent fire stopping comes as a result of the normal building construction that's incidental to necessary structural purposes. Legal fire stopping is to meet the requirements of a code. The effectiveness of fire stopping. The lack of fire stopping in one stud channel is sufficient to transmit fire. In older houses, all four sides of the chimney-like stud channels are combustible. A lack of fire stopping is particularly critical in balloon frame buildings. In fact, it's critical in balloon frame buildings. Building owners are not at all familiar with the basic gas law. If the temperature rises and the volume remains the same, the pressure rises. Now let's talk about the cutoff ends of joists. This can be used as fire stopping and there's no seal because the wood cutout creates a space. Now let's talk about the difference between West Coast and East Coast construction, and I mentioned this briefly earlier. There are uniformly unsatisfactory practices. A sheet of gypsum board is buttered into place. Then thin plywood or flake board can be poorly fitted. And in older homes on the East Coast, you have construction that literally goes back to when we were still part of the British Empire. So firefighters in the East Coast face literally every type of home construction, whereas out west we have construction that's limited to about the last 135 years or so, roughly. So there's one big difference. Now let's talk about removal of fire stops. These can be removed for the installation of such items such as heat ducts, electrical cables, sprinkler systems, and central vacuum cleaner systems, but are unlikely to be replaced. Now we're going to discuss draft stopping and truss floors. Truss voids in each floor exist, and truss proponents argue that fire stopping will mitigate the problem, but it will not prevent the collapse of the affected area. A large enough area to develop a severe backdraft certainly exists, and it could also provide backdraft explosion or provide significant collapse. Protecting wood from ignition. Some sobering news. Most fires are fought by firefighters standing on, in, or under a combustible structure. Encasing wood in cement helps promote decay. Now let's discuss impregnation. Wood can be impregnated with chemicals or via pressure treatments. It can be made fire retardant, not fireproof, but fire retardant. With pressure treatment, it can reduce wood's flame spread. Pressure treatment can reduce the hazard of wood construction, and treated wood will burn, although at a slower rate. The Underwriters Laboratories, or UL, provides various classifications of treated lumber. Consult the lumber, treated, parentheses, BPW, parentheses. This is an article / handbook that the Underwriters Laboratories have written, and you need to look it up online and read it. Now we'll discuss chemicals. Previously used ones impregnated the wood but leached out and corroded metal connectors. New impregnated wood claims cite non-corrosive material. Some bad practices. Fire retardant, or FRT plywood, 1 sheet wide on both ends of firewall. Plywood laminates with fire exposure, and plywood treated with certain chemicals can decay from heat. Surface coatings. There's intumescent coating, and it swells up when heated. People will spread it thinner than is recommended, and applying it to an existing installation leaves the unexposed surfaces untreated. Some dangerous treated wood. Treated plywood and lumber have been used for basement walls. It's widely used for exterior structures, but it's still combustible and might cause a collapse, and the fumes are toxic. Now let's discuss plywood. Wood's lack of shear strength along the grain could be overcome. Plywood was the answer. Plywood exposed to fire delaminates. In other words, the layers that are compressed together come apart. But plywood can be impregnated to render it fire retardant and help prevent that from happening. But ultimately, if it gets hot enough, it's still going to happen. Now we'll talk about spliced timbers. Spliced timbers are joined by various metal connectors to transfer loads. The spliced timber acts as a single member. The heated metal connections can destroy the wood and timber may fail. Let's talk about laminated timbers. These are plank-like sections of nominal 2-inch boards that are glued together under pressure to produce large arches, beams, girders, and columns. They burn like solid heavy timbers and do not delaminate like plywood does. Laminated wood beams are not the same thing, however, as wooden I-beams. Now let's discuss paper wrapping. Laminated timbers are shipped in a protective gear wrapper. Paper is hemp reinforced and coated with bituminous moisture repellent. Paper ignites readily and has a high flame spread. So if you're finding a fire in new construction, this is something you may absolutely encounter. Now we'll discuss planks. These are fabricated by gluing 3 boards together with the center board protruding on one side and indented on the other. They may separate during fire, causing boards to fall from the overhead. And then there's chipboard. Wood chips are often glued together to make flat sheets. Sometimes these are used for the floors of mobile homes. Some chipboard is water soluble, so it's going to become soggy and it's going to begin to sag as a result, and certainly it is not impervious from collapse. Now we'll discuss flitch place girders. These consist of a composite of a steel plate or plywood sandwiched between 2 beams. The failure of the connection between the wood and steel or burnout of the plywood could certainly cause failure. Now we'll discuss sheathing. This is covering applied to the studs or framing of a structure. The exterior surface covers the sheathing, and many old houses were built without sheathing. Now we'll look at low-density black fiberboard. It's moisture and vermin proofed, but carries the warning combustible, may burn or smolder if ignited. And it certainly can be ignited by plumber's torch. So if someone comes in to do repiping or repair on piping, it can absolutely cause it to ignite. Now we'll look at plywood and gypsum. Plywood is also used for sheathing, and it may be used at the corners to provide shear strength. Gypsum is also used for sheathing and combined with brick veneer surfacing and gypsum interior surface, and is used to provide rated fire-resistive exterior walls. Now we'll look at foamed plastic, also used for sheathing. It may or may not be flame inhibited, and in a fire it may degrade and give off noxious fumes. Now let's look at siding. Novelty siding, like dapboard, is combustible siding laid over the sheathing of a building. Batten is a type of siding that uses vertical strips of wood to cover joists. Plywood siding comes in 4-foot wide sheets that give the appearance of 4-inch wide strips about a ½ inch apart. Shingle and shake is a type of siding, and these thick wooden shingles are formed by splitting a short log into tapered sections. Asbestos cement shingle is a fireproof roofing shingle that is composed of cement reinforced asbestos fibers. Asphalt felt asphalt felt siding, which is also called gasoline siding, is manufactured by saturating a dry felt with asphalt, then coating it with fine glass fiber. It has no fire resistance value. Continuing with siding, you have vinyl siding, which is thermoplastic, which will deform and drip when introduced to a fire situation. And you can see on this house where the fire line is and how it's like melted plastic along that far right edge. So it will deform and then just drip. Metal siding is made to look like another type of siding. Corrugated metal siding is made of grooved panels and is utilized on industrial buildings or of wood or steel frame. Stucco is made of Portland cement and is an exterior finish. Now we'll look at brick veneer. It's economically attractive. Brick veneer walls are laid up from the foundation on one withe. Such a wall is unstable because it's thin. In a veneered wall, galvanized steel anchors are nailed to the studs. If there's a fire in the wall, the nails may detach from the studs due to paralytic decomposition. If a brick wall is all stretchers, suspect brick veneer. Buildings may combine brick veneer and solid brick masonry, so that's something to be aware of. You need to know when you approach a burning house if there's a brick veneer finish or a solid brick wall, because some constructions have both, so you know which to watch out for. Now we'll look at stone veneer. It's made from natural or artificial stone and cast concrete. Permastone is one trade name. Stones are stacked and mortared to a wire lathe base, and you can see an evidence of that type of construction right here in this picture. Now let's look at wood shingle roofing. Some of the greatest fires in history have been due to the spread of fire by wood shingle roofs. The conflagration hazard presented by wood shingles is a very serious consideration. And out west, even though new construction forbids it, older homes have a lot of wood shake or wood shingle construction. So just be aware of that. Unfortunately, wood shingling is making a strong comeback. Many areas have wood shingled roofs, but they are permitted wherever frame buildings are permitted. Fires in Houston, Texas, and Davis, California are devastating examples of this type of roofing. And as I said, technically you can still build in California, but good luck trying to find homeowners insurance, because most insurance companies will not underwrite the homeowner's policy if it has this type of roofing, just because of the astronomical hazard it presents. It can be prevented if it's treated regularly, but the bottom line is people don't do it, so insurance underwriters will not write a policy for it. Now, there are various testing laboratories in existence. One that rate wood shingles in accordance to NFPA 256, which is the standard methods of fire tests of roof coverings. The elements considered include flame exposure, spread of flame, and resistance to burning brands or flying pieces of burning wood. Roofing materials are classified as A, B, or C. For clarification on that, you need to make sure you read your text so you have a total understanding of that. Now we'll look at tile roofs. Tile roofs are heavy, but they're good. They're still popular today. But if they collapse, thousands of pounds of tile when making, and also if there's a collapse in a fire, you're looking at a tremendous amount of weight that's going to be coming down. So you should always use a fog attack on an attic fire with a tile roof, and the tile roof is truss supported, and if the trusses fail, the tile is going to come with it. So that's a lot of weight that's going to come down. However, they are fire retardant and very durable. So they have their benefits, but they do have their downfalls as well. Imitation timber. Watch out for the following. Unprotected steel beams or columns that are boxed in wood to look like wooden structural members. The unprotected steel encased in plaster is surfaced to look like wood, and you can have false wood beams that are actually hollow wooden boxes. You can also encounter polyurethane imitation wood beams and fittings such as brackets, and brick or block buildings may be covered with wood veneer. So making wood construction safe. Wood is a uniquely renewable resource. Unfortunately, it is combustible. Combustibility can be dealt with only by complete automatic sprinkler protection, properly designed, adequate water supplies. So let's review what we covered in this chapter. Type 5 construction includes 6 types of wood frame structures: log cabins, post and frame, balloon frame, platform frame, plank and beam, and truss frame. In a balloon frame building, fire can spread through all the interconnected spaces from cellar to attic and across the ceiling. The current practice of designing wood buildings of lighter and lighter materials and substituting geometry for mass has brought about significant strides in the architectural field, but has also created significant problems in the field of firefighting. Trusses are one example of such a development. One of the major problems that we discussed of combustible construction is fire spread through hidden voids. We also talked about fire stopping and how it's often required by code to be installed to prevent spread of fire, but there are no tested standards for wood fire stopping or draft stopping. Wood can be made either fireproof or non-combustible. Unfortunately, that's expensive and not commonly used. And finally, wood is a uniquely renewable resource, but it is always combustible. The problems of its combustibility can be dealt with only by complete automatic sprinkler protection, properly designed with adequate water supplies, and being completely maintained or competently maintained. Structures with unsprinklered floor or attic voids do not have complete sprinkler protection. Okay, class, that's it for this chapter. As always, thank you for your attention and time. If you have any questions, if you need clarification or answers to specifics, make sure you contact your instructor. Again, thank you, and we'll see you next class.